On a cold winter night in the small town of Whispering Pines, Hannah sat on the small sofa in her living room, her eyes fixed on an invisible point on the wall. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, where her unborn child seemed to be peacefully resting, a stark contrast to the chaos within her. Just a few hours earlier, her husband Daniel had walked out the door, taking with him all the promises of a future they had planned together. Hannah's life, up until that moment, had felt like something out of a fairy tale. She and Daniel had met in college, where his charisma and the dreams they shared seemed to create the foundation for an unshakable love. Daniel was an ambitious man, determined to build a successful career, and Hannah, with her kind heart, had always stood by him, encouraging every step of his journey. They married a few years later and soon bought a small house in Whispering Pines, where they had planned to build their life together. For Hannah, those early years were filled with happiness, laughter, and shared hopes. But over time, something changed. Daniel began to grow distant, consumed by his own ambitions. When Hannah discovered she was pregnant, she thought this might rekindle their connection, bringing back the joy that seemed to be slipping away. However, the news wasn't met with the enthusiasm she had hoped for. Instead, Daniel accused her of derailing his plans and dreams, making it clear that the pregnancy was a burden he wasn't willing to bear. That fateful night, his words cut like blades. "I can't do this, Hannah. This isn't what I wanted for my life," he said before walking out the door, without so much as a glance back. The sound of the door slamming still echoed in her mind like a final goodbye. He didn't look back. Not a single word of comfort. Just the emptiness and silence that now filled the house that had once been a home. Silent tears rolled down Hannah's cheeks as the weight of loneliness settled deep in her heart. "I'll be fine. We'll be fine," she whispered, as if her child could hear her. She felt a faint movement in her belly, like a silent response, and in that moment, something inside her ignited, a spark of hope, of strength. She knew she had to start over, even if it felt impossible. 2 days later, Hannah made the hardest decision of her life. The house she was leaving behind was far more than just bricks and wood. It was the place where her hopes and dreams had been built, and now, it all seemed to be falling apart. Every room told a story: the couch where she and Daniel used to sit and dream together, the kitchen where he would hug her while she cooked dinner, and even the nursery they had planned for their baby. But those same places now felt cold, filled with painful memories of a happiness that no longer existed. With tears streaming down her face, Hannah packed her belongings. Every item she placed in her bags carried emotional weight: the wedding photo frame, the blanket Daniel had given her during their first winter together. Yet, despite the pain, she knew she had to move forward. With a few suitcases and boxes, she set off into the unknown. Her destination? A small cabin she had inherited from her grandmother, nestled in a remote valley surrounded by mountains and dense forests. The cabin was simple, made of weathered wood, but it radiated a rustic charm that seemed to embrace her the moment she arrived. The isolation offered a kind of peace the city could never provide. As she arrived, she took a deep breath of the fresh mountain air, feeling for the first time in days that she could truly breathe. The vastness of the valley before her seemed to promise a new beginning, a place where she and her child could rewrite their story. Hannah spent her first moments on the cabin's porch, gazing at the horizon, as the gentle mountain breeze seemed to whisper that she had made the right decision. The nights at the cabin were quiet, sometimes eerily so. The wind whistled through the trees, and the windows creaked with the settling of the old wood. On one of those nights, while sitting in the rocking chair near the fireplace, she heard a strange noise coming from outside, a muffled sound, like someone or something stumbling. She grabbed a flashlight and, with her heart pounding, opened the cabin door. The beam of light revealed a man collapsed near the entrance. He was soaked from the rain, with visible injuries on his arms and face. Hannah's instinct was to hesitate. She was alone, pregnant, and this man was a complete stranger. But something in her heart urged her to act. Carefully, she dragged him inside the cabin, placing him near the fireplace to warm him up. The man, whose name was Frank, was unconscious but breathing. Hannah didn't know what had happened to him, but she decided she couldn't leave him out there. In the days that followed, Frank began to recover. When he finally woke up, his eyes slowly adjusted to the soft light streaming through the window. He moved with difficulty, and upon noticing Hannah sitting by his side, he looked confused. His voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. Where am I? Who are you? Hannah set down the bowl of soup she was holding and leaned slightly toward him, trying to appear as reassuring as possible. You're safe. My name is Hannah. I found you outside the cabin during the storm. You were injured and unconscious, so I brought you inside. Frank blinked a few times, processing her words. He glanced around, taking in the simple but cozy interior of the cabin, before his eyes stopped on Hannah's rounded belly. His expression shifted from confusion to surprise. You're pregnant? And you live here alone? Hannah nodded slightly, a shy smile on her face. Yes. It's a long story, but this place is my refuge now. Frank let out a sigh, bringing his hand to his forehead, where he felt a dull ache. I don't know what to say. You could have left me out there. You had no obligation to help me. Maybe not, Hannah replied calmly, but I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I had ignored someone in need. Besides, no one should face something like that alone. There was a moment of silence between them, heavy with something neither of them could yet identify. Although grateful, Frank seemed to carry an invisible burden, something hidden behind his tired eyes. He avoided sharing details about what had brought him there, only muttering that he needed time to heal. As days passed, Frank began helping Hannah with tasks around the cabin, despite still being somewhat weak. He chopped wood, repaired the creaking windows, and fetched water from a nearby stream. These small contributions, though simple, started filling the empty spaces in Hannah's routine. In turn, she realized she was no longer entirely alone. Day by day, something seemed to shift between them, a quiet partnership emerging, marked by small gestures of help, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding. One cold evening, as they shared a simple meal by the soft glow of the fireplace, Frank finally broke the silence that hung between them. He stared at his plate, slowly moving the food around with his fork, before lifting his eyes to meet Hannah's. With a deep sigh, he began to speak, his voice heavy with pain and regret. I'm not the person you think I am, Hannah. I didn't end up here by chance. I was running away, trying to escape everything I've lost. He paused, as if gathering the strength to continue. I had a childhood friend, someone I trusted more than anyone. My family owned a small business, something simple but enough to sustain us. When my father fell ill, I had to take on the responsibility alone, and this friend offered to help. He said he'd handle everything while I focused on my father. I trusted him, signed documents without questioning, and after my father passed, I found out he had transferred the business into his name. I lost everything. Frank stopped, his hand trembling slightly as he held the fork. It wasn't just the business. It was my family's legacy, my father's dream. And the worst part was realizing someone I saw as a brother could betray me like that. He looked away, his voice dropping lower. Since then, I've been wandering, trying to find some sense, some peace. Hannah listened intently, her heart aching with every word he spoke. She could feel the depth of Frank's pain, a pain that mirrored her own. She decided it was time to share her story too. Placing her hand gently on the table, close to his, she began to speak, her voice soft yet steady. I've been betrayed too, but in a different way. When I told my husband Daniel that I was pregnant, I thought it would be a moment of joy, something that would strengthen our connection. But that's not what happened. He told me I was ruining his dreams, that I was a burden. His words cut like blades, and then, he left. He just left me here, alone. I thought I'd never recover from it. Tears glistened in Hannah's eyes, but she held them back, taking a deep breath. For a long time, I kept asking myself what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I enough for him? But over time, I realized the fault wasn't mine. Just like you, I was hurt by someone who should have cared for me. Frank lifted his eyes, and for a moment, the two of them stared at each other in silence. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted, filled with something almost tangible, a deep connection between two souls who shared similar wounds. For the first time, they both felt they were no longer alone in their pain. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of mutual understanding and a quiet relief neither of them had expected to find. As the weeks passed, the bond between Hannah and Frank grew stronger. Simple gestures became deeply meaningful. Frank often spoke to the baby, placing his hand gently on Hannah's belly with a care that reflected the respect he had for her and the new life she was carrying. He always approached slowly, seeking her permission with his eyes, as if the act itself was sacred. While resting his hand on her belly, he would say things like, "Hey, little one, take good care of your mom. She's amazing, you know." These moments not only warmed Hannah's heart but made her feel something she hadn't experienced in a long time: safety. Frank's kindness and respect became evident in the smallest gestures, like the gentle way he spoke or the tenderness in his touch. With each passing day, Hannah grew more comfortable around him, trusting that he wasn't there just out of gratitude but because he genuinely cared. Eventually, they both realized they were falling in love. However, the fear of being hurt again made them hesitant to admit their feelings. One evening, under the soft glow of the fireplace, Frank finally broke the silence. "Hannah, you've shown me that there's still beauty in the world, even after so much pain." With tears welling in her eyes, Hannah replied, "And you've given me hope again." They kissed, sealing the beginning of a new story together. Before moving forward, they both decided they needed to confront the unresolved pieces of their pasts, even if it meant reopening old wounds. Frank returned to the city to confront the friend who had betrayed him, carrying a mix of anger and determination. The conversation was intense. The friend tried to justify his actions with weak excuses, but Frank, with a steady gaze, interrupted him. "I don't want your explanations or apologies. I just want you to know that despite everything, I won't let this define me." As he left that office, Frank felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he breathed deeply, feeling truly free to move on. Hannah, on the other hand, met Daniel in a quiet cafe in town. When he arrived, his expression was full of disdain, as if she were nothing more than a nuisance. But unlike the woman he had left behind, Hannah now radiated an unshakable confidence. She looked him directly in the eye and said firmly, "Daniel, I don't need you. I didn't need you when you left me, and I don't need you now. My child will have the best future, and I will make sure of that myself." Daniel, caught off guard by her strength, tried to argue but realized nothing he said would matter. Hannah stood up, leaving him alone at the table, as a profound sense of liberation washed over her. She had closed that chapter of her life and was now ready to embrace the future with Frank and her child. After addressing the unresolved parts of their past, Frank and Hannah finally felt ready to turn the page and begin a new chapter, their chapter. A feeling of freedom enveloped them like a light, refreshing breeze. A few days later, on a clear morning, Hannah began to feel the first contractions of labor. Frank, who was by her side, immediately noticed the change in her expression and, without hesitation, helped her prepare to go to the hospital. The drive was filled with emotion and anticipation as Frank, in a calm voice, reassured her, "We're almost there, Hannah. You are incredibly strong." When they arrived at the hospital, the medical team quickly took over. Frank never left Hannah's side, holding her hand firmly and offering words of encouragement. Hours later, the cry of a newborn filled the room. It was a boy. They decided to name him Lucas. Frank held Lucas in his arms with indescribable tenderness, tears streaming down his face as he said, "Welcome to the world, little one. We're going to take care of you with all the love we have." Hannah watched the scene, feeling a wave of gratitude and happiness like never before. In that moment, their lives changed forever. Lucas was the embodiment of the love and hope they had found in each other. The cabin, once a refuge of solitude, was now filled with the laughter of Lucas, the careful steps of Frank as he rocked him to sleep, and the unconditional love of Hannah. Frank became a devoted father, always attentive to the little one's needs, while Hannah blossomed in her new journey as a resilient mother. Together, they built a home full of love, support, and small daily celebrations, from Lucas's first smile to the moments when his tiny hands wrapped around Frank's finger. In the end, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They realized that the hardships of the past had shaped them but had not defined them. They learned that true love arises when two people have the courage to open their hearts and face their fears together. And above all, they discovered that even in the darkest moments, life offers new beginnings. In that cabin, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains, Frank, Hannah, and Lucas built a life that was much more than a fresh start. It was proof that love and courage can transform everything. May this story inspire those who hear it to never give up on starting over and to believe that even when everything seems lost, there is always another chance waiting. Did you enjoy this story full of love and resilience? then don't let the emotion stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, move, and remind us that there's always a new chance to start again. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for being here and supporting my videos. You're helping me grow every day. I'll see you in the next story.